The Society for Culture and Environment extends a warm welcome. Today's session is titled, Is India Heading for Environmental Collapse? From the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival, January 2020. We have with us Ms. Bharati Chaturvedi, environmentalist, columnist, and founder director of Chintan Environmental Research and Action Group. She will be in conversation with Mr. S.P.S. Parihar, ex-chairman of the Central Pollution Control Board, and Mr. Raghav Chandra, president of the Society for Culture and Environment, director of Bhopal Literature and Art Festival, and an author too.
Midst of two stalwarts, both dealing with environmental issues, both protecting us, both fighting to ensure that we lead lives which are healthy, clean and fit. Bharati Chaturvedi, who heads Chintan, whom I have known for so many years, as a person who is absolutely grounded, practical and connected with the subject of waste management and environment. She writes a column for Hindustan Times regularly. It's a very pithy column, and in about 400 words she manages to convey what others would in about 4,000 words. S.P.S. Parihar Saab, who has been my colleague in the government of Madhya Pradesh and who is today the chairman of the Central Pollution Control Board, and as all of us are aware, with the Supreme Court breathing down every administrator's neck with the government's neck, Parihar Saab is faced with the onerous task of protecting our environment on a day-to-day basis, of dealing with subjects like the overall fog, the haze, the blur over Delhi, which is causing so much concern, the fall in the AQI levels and everything. And I think both of them, Bharati represents the non-governmental system at its very epitome. Surya Parihar Saab represents the governmental side of the environmental subject. So both of them are ideally pitted here to explain to us why things are going the way they are. And I would first like to ask you, Bharati, why are we so suddenly so pessimistic, and why is it that today almost all newspapers, all articles and all magazines nationally today are feeling extremely pessimistic about it and talking of this entire subject of the climate and the environmental crisis, and whether we are heading for an environmental collapse? Why should this thought have even emerged? Let's see if that mic is better as we use this.
Thank you, Raghav, and aap sabko thank you. I feel that there's a solid reason why why we feel pessimistic. You just have to look at the map of the world. 20% of all the birds in the United States have disappeared in the last 50 years. 1 billion animals in the last 2 months have died in the Australian fires. Madrid का जो COP25 हुआ अभी, it was a complete disaster, and that is ऐसे साल में जब ग्रेटा थुनबर्ग पूरी दुनिया को हिला रही थी, एंड जब हमारी यूथ सारी सड़कों पे आई हुई थी, rich nation से, गरीब nation से. So I feel, and here we are, even in our own country, I mean, we are seeing erratic weather events. We are experiencing things beyond our own control. We are a country that has not eaten up a lot of resources in the last 150 years, and still we're quite shaken up. We're suffering our agriculture in the coming years, the droughts. So I think we have every reason to consider a kind of a climatic collapse. To me, 11th October, 10th and 11th October 2019, मुझे तो लगा these are signs from heavens when the birds in Sambar Lake just began to die, and in the end, Rajasthan ke Sambar Lake mein we lost 65,000 birds approximately. So I do feel that we are in a stage where we have failed in many ways. The world has failed, and especially countries that have consumed so much and because of whom the world is heated, completely failed to cut down on this crisis and show any kind of leadership, whether we look at Trump or whether we look at Bolsonaro in Brazil.
And Surya, do you also feel that it's appropriate to speculate and contemplate whether we are heading for an environmental collapse, or you think that is modern day, extreme modern day Cassandrism or pessimism, and that's too far-fetched and things are pretty much in shape and can be redeemed with a few active steps from agencies such as yours and the state governments?
Thank you, sir. I'm very happy to see some of my very, very senior colleagues present here. And Bharti, of course, we've been working for some time together now. What she said, of course, is factual, and there is a concern, certainly, that things are difficult as far as environment is concerned. But let me also add some positive thought to what has been said, and in the Indian context especially, we just learned that the State of Environment report has come out very recently, and you'll be happy to note that the forest and tree cover has not only been maintained since 2017, in fact it has gone up by about 5,000 square kilometers. Now, which is a very encouraging sign, and we see that in terms of being able to maintain the carbon sink in our country, and that's our contribution to the world. When we talk about the things happening around in Sambar Lake or in other places across the country, we talk also about what's happening in Delhi in terms of air pollution, which seems to be a major cause for concern. Since I've been dealing with this subject, I know for sure that the problem of air pollution in Delhi has not only been diagnosed, but is also being addressed in a very systematic fashion. Now, that's something which is very important, that not only that you recognize that there is a problem, you are not in a denial mode, and also try and think of solutions to deal with that particular problem. Talking specifically about the air pollution related issues, you would notice that when we look at the map of country and we look at the winter months especially, it's really the Indo-Gangetic plain which suffers, and rest of the country is much better. We are sitting in Bhopal, Indore, winter months, the air quality is far superior to what you see in Delhi, Indo-Gangetic plain. Now, reason primarily is the geography of that area, the alluvial soil in the entire Indo-Gangetic plain, the Himalayas there, the barrier for air to flow, the high moisture in that area, and of course the human population itself residing in that part of the country. So what we are looking at now is to provide solutions to that part of the country to begin with, by preparing specific plans of action. And not only those plans are in place, they have still started executing those plans. And especially Delhi, if I may quote, since 2016 we've been executing a specific plan. And you'll be happy to note that the particulate matter emissions, which we look at very closely, which is the main source of pollution in that part of the country, they've come down to almost 25% since 2016. So I would say that while we are very concerned, we recognize there is a problem. We also know that the problem has a solution, and we are trying to attempt solutions. I have to also say that I've been discussing with Bharti for a while now. She's been looking at plastic waste management very closely. And it is very important for government departments, governments to work very closely with people's organizations, to try and get a sense of what is required, and also get the people to participate in what we do. Unless we do that, the pace of corrective action will not be to the desired level. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Surya. Bharti, do you think You know, ever since our economic development has grown out of the historic Hindu rate of growth, our environmental levels have suddenly plummeted. And in the Indian context, perhaps even with your global understanding, do you think that there is a close relationship between extreme or efforts and to ramp up economic development and the environmental degradation that takes place? And do you think India is a good example of how unplanned or unmanaged economic development can lead to economic environmental degradation?
So, the beauty about living in India is that we live in several parallel realities every single day. So we are quite comfortable eating from a really basic example is just that ice cream ka that little wooden stick that you eat the ice cream with in all the ice cream thelas, vis-a-vis, really high, malls that consume so much electricity and, are just they have such a huge footprint. So I think the way I see it is I see that we have this desire to quickly grow, but we haven't really thought, I think after the, after in 91, I think because we had to survive and all the steps we took after that, we somehow, our mental footprint was that we need to survive, we need to grow, and the environment, the country might collapse, the economy might collapse, and therefore I think environmental issues became quite polarized. Whether you look at, the government versus the Narmada Bachao Andolan. I know I was in school and you were a freshly minted IAS officer. I remember you told me once, you said Harsood was the Woodstock of India and you weren't even there. And I said, no, Raghav, I was there. And yeah, I was there.
In Harsood?
I came, my parents weren't sure where I'd gone. They thought I'd gone for some school little thing, but we were there. It was a rough thing. We were not used to it. We were pampered Delhi elite kids, but I was there.
For everybody's information, that was a big event, and we had environmentalists from all over the world there and all the TV channels from all over the world covering that event.
Yes, and so what I'm trying to really say is that really stuck in my mind, and that's probably why I chose this path, is because I think we chose a development model where we would force a clash, where there isn't actually a need, and that's what I mean by parallel realities. So you can actually combine decentralization and centralization, whether you look at models of water or whatever else you look at, but you have to choose quite clearly where exactly you're going. If you're going to cut down, several 100,000 trees because you want to, create a piece of infrastructure, then you clearly don't value human life, you don't value future generations, you don't value quality of life. And I think, I really think we need to also rethink ourselves in terms of more regional thinking. What's the point having something like SAARC, if Bangladesh and Nepal and India and other countries just can't breathe and we don't share enough technology, we're in similar, different parts of our Indo-Gangetic plain are in different parts of these countries' airsheds, we don't think regionally. I mean, I really think that the development model is quite, doesn't consider the benefit of the environment, but we ourselves really don't really take any advantage of the fact that we're part of a region, and even our macro thinking of ourselves is quite micro, at least unable to be more imaginative.
Surya, do you think there is a multiplicity of agencies which are really looking into environment, and that is in some way obstructing us from taking a holistic and sorted out view of how to proceed? We have the NGT, we have the Supreme Court getting involved. Supreme Court sets up committees like the EPCA. Do they in any way prevent you from being able to function as comprehensively and holistically and adequately as you would like to?
So if you permit, before I answer this question specifically,
Like to supplement what
if
Bharti
I'd like
said.
to supplement
Yeah.
on the regional context. Yes, that's very, very important for us, and we do realize that the entire region is one, and various countries are impacting each other in terms of the activities that we carry out. And therefore, specifically on the air issue, it's ICIMOD which is looking at a regional perspective, talking to various countries and looking at a regional plan to deal with the air pollution. Very recently, we have signed with Bhutan on managing waste, because cross-border issues are there in terms of dumping of waste and treating waste. So we are, of course, discussing with Bhutan also. Now, coming to the issue of multiplicity of agencies, yes, it does create problems at times that there are too many agencies trying to do the same thing, and not being able to very clearly assess as to which is the agency which is responsible for monitoring, for coordination. Very recently, so you may be aware that these issues were taken up by the NGT, and now various verticals like the air, water, waste, management issues have now been brought into focus at the level of chief secretary in each state, because we realize that the departments of environment, department of development, pollution control boards, while they were doing their bit, but there was somebody required at the state level to be able to coordinate and steer the whole thing. And therefore now there is a clear thinking that at the state level it's the chief secretary who is supposed to be looking at all these issues, which has brought in good results. Over the past few months I've been touring various states, and when I discuss with people, they're very happy with the current arrangement where top level executive in the states is able to look at the whole thing in a holistic fashion. Delhi is a typical example where we have difficulties in coordination, but there again the chief secretary Delhi is now being able to bring a lot of people together. And on the regulatory side, of course, as the central board, we do try and do our bit to coordinate. So I would say that we did realize that there was a problem of multiplicity of agencies, and now institutions have been identified, not only at the state level but also at the district level, where one institution will be coordinating the entire effort. So things are looking up.
So this is a question to both of you, Bharti and Surya, about the importance of urban planning. And Surya, you've been Principal Secretary Urban Development for some years. Bharti, you've written a book on Delhi, and you've also, an urban environmentalist in several ways. So my understanding, both as an urban administrator and as a person who has been involved with the environmental issues, is that especially for our cities, when we talk of environmental decay, it's our cities which are really going down the drain. And on the one hand, we see cities like Bangalore and Delhi, showing that they are very high in terms of receipt of FDI and such like. But actually, the way the traffic is managed, the way there is a proliferation of all kinds of high-rises, there is unplanned developments that are taking place. I think the core of our urban environmental issues is the lack of town planning, in the serious sense, in the conservative sense, the kind of town planning which is envisaged, which European cities have, but surprisingly and unfortunately our cities don't have. And so it is in the matter of appropriate use of land, so having a planned development and earmarking, delineating what should be where. We've never, for instance, thought of parking, as a result of which now, when you've built up all the space, there is no space for parking. So things like that. So I would like to have, for the benefit of everyone, your take on how important you feel that town planning is as a matter of urban development and what its impact on the environment is, because that's unfortunately, why I'm mentioning it, that my personal take is that politicians have sort of taken over that aspect of governance only to appease and to please. So for instance, Haryana, we've had change of land use issues and all that. We've seen all over, every state. And unless we take care of that and do that correctly, we will never really have good urban environment planning.
I'm very happy that you raised that issue, sir, because while we've been looking at various studies like the source apportionment, emission inventories, etc., and also looking at waste management, maybe in isolation, we did realize that carrying capacity is something that needs to be looked at much more closely than what we've been doing. And therefore, what we've done very recently is to do a carrying capacity study in Himachal, in 2 cities, and it's brought out very good results for us in terms of what needs to be done for future. Also, carrying capacity studies are now being initiated for other cities which are non-attainment in terms of air pollution. But something very interesting came out, that when we looked around for experts to do the carrying capacity studies, there is a dearth of experts in our own country. There are not very many experts who can do the carrying capacity studies in a very methodological, very scientific fashion. So that's the current challenge that we're facing, to be able to get right kind of and right amount of experts to do this fairly quickly, especially in cities which are big, which are suffering to begin with. And therefore, to take your point, sir, certainly this is something which is very critical and important, and it has a huge bearing on how do we manage environment, especially the urban scenario.
Bharti, how would you?
Well, I really would like to distinguish between town planning and what's happening in a lot of our cities, which is tragic real estateization of our cities. So I think it's a fatal flaw to look at a city and to constantly imagine what kind of money you can squeeze out of the last square inch of it and say this is so inconvenient not to, I'll take my favorite example, which is, well, if you want I could do Delhi as well, but essentially the way, whether it's RA Forest, whether it's, 13,000 trees in Delhi to be cut down, whether it's Dwarka Express, whatever it is, it's about, so much of it is about currently converting cities into little patches of real estate. I think that's absolutely ludicrous. And if I may say so, as an activist, as an environmentalist, I'm always very grateful for the politicians. I'll tell you why. Because you can always bug them, and if you bug them enough, they'll listen to you, and they may not agree with you. But you can get into an intense dialogue, and you can just refuse to leave their offices or stand outside their houses. And I think there's a great merit in that. So I think while we are all, as a community of people who have to breathe the air of the NCR and live in this beautiful country, it's terrible to see what's happening with the Aravalis and the change of land use. On the other hand, we are, the way that we're looking at it is let's push these political buttons. I also feel that, so that having been said, I think one of the things we keep forgetting is that over 70% of everybody in a city is actually informal sector. So you never account for the balloon wala and the ice cream wala and the maid, but they're human beings and they need water and they need places to live. And these are people who are left most vulnerable when you completely destroy, say, the green belt, or you don't have walking spaces, or they're unable to cycle, because these are people of modest means. And only in cities like Bombay and Delhi, though they even manage minimum wages, most of them earn approximately minimum wages in the biggest cities. And these are people who increasingly, as our cities have altered in India, we've seen that rather than having slums in the center of the city, we're finding that they're relocated to the peripheries, which makes it much more expensive for these people to provide their services, because it's so expensive to travel and these other places are not so well developed. Therefore, my understanding is that rather than look at a city for just town planning, I would look at a city through the lens of equity. does every single person have basic clean water, toilets? We did a survey which we haven't released, which we will release closer to the date, where it shows that 60% of people who work in repair work, in recycling, and things like that in Delhi, which is the capital of this country, 60% of the women didn't have, in non-acknowledged slums, I'm not talking of authorized slums, there's also something called slums which are not acknowledged, actually didn't have any access to toilets, and they were extremely shocked, and they were very angry, and that's the number one shocker, and there are many more in the data. So I'm only trying to say that, number one, stop converting urban India into pieces of real estate, because you end up with very unsustainable places with very poor quality of life. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying. I'm a car owner myself, but wouldn't it be better if we just got the buses that we needed and made them safe and affordable and reliable, and we didn't have to stand for 40 minutes on the ring road waiting for a mudrika that will not come. You know, if we just did something as basic and managed our cities, I think we would be a far more sustainable the urban part of India would be much more sustainable. I would look at equity. I think we forget equity very often. I mean, how can you have a capital city with such poor infrastructure for unauthorized slum women? It's shocking. And I also think, thirdly, that we've begun in cities to look at green as something that's an enemy of better quality of life. So you're cutting down trees and saying, I'll plant some more 15 kilometers away, but guess what? Those trees play a different role. They're much smaller, they're going to take many years to become big, and you've completely broken the ecological backbone of your city, whatever that city might be. And I think that is why I really like politicians, because you can have these conversations with them, and you know, so I think they might real estatize something, but we can fight back.
So this thing about equity versus rationality.
It's rational to be equitous.
We can argue about that, but you know, for instance, in Delhi, Bharti, I'd like, and Surya, your take also, both academically and as an administrator, what the government of Delhi did by way of announcing various SOPs to those living in, you know, in the poorer localities and the economically weaker sections, announcing things like a rollback on their water tax, water charges, rollback on various other things, and now we just a little while back we did hear Rajendra Singh, the Waterman of India, the Magsaysay Award winner, talking about how we have you know, been absolutely drawing on our groundwater resources, paying absolutely a pittance for it, whereas abroad, for every bit of water that you consume, your electricity bill and your water bill are broadly the same. And here we have state governments racing to the bottom in absolutely sheerly populistic moves, waiving off water and electricity tariffs. And you know, once you do it once, then it's a continuous race to the bottom. So on the one hand, it helps to, you know, bring about a more equitous kind of a social regime, but on the other hand, it sets off a wrong effect. People expect more and more such SOPs. They don't want to pay user charges. It's bad for the psyche, bad for the economy, and therefore, in the long run, you will not be able to provide the kind of environmental infrastructure that you need to provide, because you won't have the resources to do that. So what's your take on that, Bharti?
Well, thanks, Raghav. Actually, I quite agree about those SOPs with you in Delhi. I think freebies are not the same things as equity. You know, I think if we could get drinkable or almost drinkable quality water, if we could all get adequate amounts of water, including somebody living, you know, in a faraway place, that would be great. To my mind, equity is when every street vendor in Purnia district is actually able to breathe clean air, and not just people with masks and air purifiers, which have kind of privatized clean air in its own perverse ways. So I really believe. So I just want to underscore the difference, and I really believe that the poor actually pay much more than we do, because apart from paying from their bodies, I mean today people who are selling bhel puri on the roads from 11 in the morning till 8:30 at night have to actually breathe in huge amounts of pollution, and I'm sure Mr. Parihar will agree with me that they pay a greater cost, and in places, in many cities, 30% of that pollution comes from motor vehicles, which they can ill afford themselves. So there are those fundamentally big ticket inequities, if I may say, if I may call them that. I also, I just want to also underscore that they also pay in other ways that we don't acknowledge. I mean, if you look at the kind of affordable food that street vendors, 5 odd lakh street vendors, just to take a random number from Delhi, we have 1.5 lakh to 2 lakh recyclers. Who pays? When was the last time you paid to throw away, a piece of cardboard? It's picked up for free, it's recycled for free, people earn their livings, and all kinds of other things. There are all kinds of services that forest dwellers give you to preserve those forests that we don't pay for. So I think, while I don't really appreciate the free water, because I think that it's very problematic, but I do think we need to acknowledge the kinds of free services that the poor not only provide to us, but the kinds of payments that they make in order to be in our city and be part of our ecosystem, and they have as much right as we do to a good, clean, healthy life. Article 14 of our Constitution.
Surya, would you like to supplement that?
No comments on Delhi. The elections are on.
Sure.
So I'm not going to.
Sure.
But borrowing from what I saw in the power sector in Madhya Pradesh, what was seen very clearly is that the farmers were happy to pay if the services were of good quality and efficient and affordable. So a reasonable price they're willing to pay, provided the services are efficient and good quality.
So, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to back you up about farmers there. We've been working with farmers in Punjab, and I'm very struck by one thing. I just want to share this quote this farmer gave me, because of the stubble burning and air pollution. And one of these farmers in Amritsar district, so, on his farm we were having lunch, which he had got, and I was eating this chawal, and he said, देखिए चावल की वजह से तो जलाना ही पड़ता है, लेकिन and he looked at me and he said, हम सब तैयार हैं, अभी आप चलिए सबसे मैं लाता हूँ आपको, हम सब ये रागी वागी सब आराम से उगा लेंगे, पानी भी इतना नहीं चाहिए, प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, लेकिन प्रॉब्लम तो आप हैं, आप खाएंगे रागी ये चावल वावल छोड़ के अपना. And that's true, and people are willing to make these big shifts instead of figuring out how to put millets into midday meals and helping our thoroughly undernourished children in Delhi and in Punjab and in Haryana get more nourishment and get cleaner air for the rest of us. We're all blaming the farmers, including, I'm sorry to say, our Supreme Court, which said I have no sympathy for the farmers. I mean, what do you mean? Punjab also has a lot of farmers' suicides. And so, it's very troubling to hear all of this, and I think it's also very disturbing to think that farmers give us our food, they're not paid very well, they're willing to, there's suicides in Punjab as well, and on top of that, while they're willing to make this change for us, they themselves are breathing that horrible stubble air that comes out because they themselves are burning it. I mean, try standing there. I've never been able to stand properly, even in a farm that was where the burning is almost over. It's just not possible. But those Dalit women and those farmers are there.
Okay.
So yeah.
One last question to the two of you before we throw it quickly open to the audience. You know, when we generally speak about the environment, there is a tendency to only look at it in very physical terms as pertaining to air, pertaining to water, but the human angle is often missed. And environment, in my view, is a much larger thing. And at the bottom of the environment, the person who really supports what is the environment for? It's for the human being. But unfortunately, the way our environmental laws are framed, the human being takes lesser priority, and which is why when for any major project which is to be launched in a district where the collector does the Jansunwai, he writes roughshod over all this thing. So I've attended some of these Jansunwais in Jharkhand and Odisha, and I've seen how the collectors call all these stakeholders, but it's practically, it's like a Ministry of External Affairs sort of, United Nations minute. It's already, the draft is ready and you just sign and write roughshod over it and it's done. So is there any move to bring in more human angle into environmental planning?
I think what you mentioned has more to do with the way we implement the rules and regulations. The thinking behind the strategy, the spirit behind the rules and regulations very clearly says that the human angle is extremely important, it is paramount. And therefore, you are very much aware about the environmental impact assessment of every project that we do. And now there is a move to also bring in the noise assessment of every project that we do, because noise is becoming more and more important in terms of impacting human health. So I would say that the thinking is very much there. The strategy behind framing these rules and regulations very clearly says that yes, human angle is important. We are in the process of conducting studies in terms of impact on health of what we do by way of projects, by way of air quality monitoring, and how does it impact health. So health is certainly not lost sight of. It's very, very important and center of our thinking.
Yeah, I'll just say that depends on which citizen. I think people with less means, we should certainly find there are issues, and though I'm very proud to say that there have been lots of movements of people which have changed and shown us what change can be, but I think we certainly should listen less to corporate citizens. You can't have Coke bullying us all the while and taking away all the groundwater and so on and so forth. So that would be my brief comment.
Thank you. So now I throw it open to the audience. Please raise your hands and we'll have a quick two or three questions.
Environmental impact. I think we are very urban centric, very metro centric. 85% of the country is rural. Now, how does that impact, and what kind of work is being done to make people aware and also assess as to the practices which they are adopting, whether they are impacting the environment negatively? Something needs to be thought along these lines also, and something needs to be done about that.
That is something that has certainly come to notice. And you have dealt with these issues before. When we look at air and water especially, we are mapping the polluted river stretches across the country, which primarily flow through the rural areas. Looking at the causes of pollution in river waters, primarily industrial sewage, and then there is a move to have specific action plans for every polluted stretch, and that is where the people's movement, the community organizations are going to be involved. Ganga is one example where gradually we are moving towards a situation where government intervention on industrial pollution has had very good impact on the rural stretches of Ganga river. As far as air is concerned, yes, sir, we were certainly urban centric, I would concede that. But very recently, I have to share with you that we are looking at something which is called as AOD, aerosol optical depth. And now AOD is essentially a satellite based observations of particulate matter, and the entire country is getting mapped. And we're using algorithms to find out which are the hotspots across the country where air is polluted. And that's where the interventions are going to begin, even in the rural settings. So things are happening with rural areas in mind, certainly, sir. It's not being ignored at all.
Bharti, would you like to also?
Yeah, very briefly, if you go across the Himalayas, I mean, I think the question is also to my mind. So when you ask rural communities what they want, that what they want might not be what is in the big picture. So often rural communities in Uttaranchal, where we work quite a lot, they say, you know, just want to shoot and get rid of these animals. I mean, get rid of the leopards right now. And we've had to abandon our farming and so on. Whereas on the other hand, conservationists from urban backgrounds venerate certain kinds of big cats and elephants and so on. So what I'm really saying is that there are, when you say what is being done for rural India, I just want to point out how complex that is, because rural India may not want what is being done for it. That's all.
Yes, sir.
Ji,
From Bhopal.
Ji, Doctor.
We are working for biomedical waste for last 18 years in Bhopal. I just want to ask about plastic policy. The government says that we will not allow to use plastic. But why don't government block those industries which are making plastic? Rather than punishing the people who are using it, why not to block at the same level where they are manufacturing?
I think what you're saying is right, that the source has to be plugged. And if somebody is manufacturing less than 50 microns in size, which is allowed as per rules, then those industries should be shut. So while the rules are in place, again coming back to the point which Mr. Raghav Chandra raised, the implementation issues are there. And we need to certainly make enforcement more robust as far as the sources are concerned. And talking about plastics, what has been said is that in terms of rules which are already there, while we're looking at anything which is less than 50 microns in size not be allowed, we're also looking at a possibility of phasing out single-use plastics. Currently, we are in the process of defining what single-use plastic is. Shortlist has already been done, which is in consultation with various stakeholders. And once that is done, then that list is going to be out in public domain, based on which phasing out will be done by 2022.
Dr. M.K. Jain, I am environmental consultant from Jaipur. I have two observations.
No, we don't want observations, we want questions.
It's
Question. Please convert it. Let's convert your thought into a question and then you can ask. Meanwhile, the gentleman at the back.
Hello everyone, my name is Rud and I'm a recent graduate in industrial engineering from Swansea University. My question is how practical and feasible it is to adopt the concept of circular economy in our country.
Which economy? Circular.
Circular economy.
Yeah.
So I feel there are a lot of things in this country that are quite circularized traditionally, and our challenge is to make them more relevant for our contemporary lives. So whether it's the mochi, I mean finally what is a circular economy, a fundamental thing about it is to make a material, design it so that it lasts not just longer but it's constantly in use rather than linear. So I think a mochi, for example, was very traditionally using pieces of tires and putting them under your shoes so that the shoes lasted and the tires lasted. And there are hundreds of such examples, they're dying out of course because none of us have those lives anymore ki aap ghar ke bahar jayenge and somebody will come and sharpen your knives. But I think it's quite important to look at new business models for old traditional forms of entrepreneurship. I also believe that circular economy has to be built into design. We have a huge pool of talent here in this country, whether it's IIT or anywhere else. And I think the way that we design whether it needs to phase out our planned obsolescence. But whether it's electronics or whether it's other kinds of things, I think textiles is a very major issue, especially because over 65% of our textiles are actually synthetic textiles, which is the same as plastics virtually. So I think that's where the challenge is.
Surya? Yeah, this is the last bit. and
Yes,
then we have Shreya.
designing with life cycle in mind is something which is very much on. And since we're sitting in Bhopal, let me also add that it would be a good idea to visit Indore, which is a leading example of municipal waste management. And that is where they have been able to attempt 90% of municipal waste that is being generated. Either it's recycled or reprocessed or reused. It's only about 5 to 10% which goes into landfill. So, and that's the target that we're looking at for the entire country. So Indore would be a good example too.
Thank you for watching the session from BLF 2020. Kindly subscribe to our channel for more such videos.